and
There we go.
for a variety of different programs. And the most recent is, but soon will not be, at Loyola University in the Institute of Pastoral Studies, which is a program called the Master of Arts in Social Justice and Community Development, which is partially a partnership with Scoop. And in that program, I teach a class called Sustainable Communities, and this is you will get the 1 hour and a half version of the class called Sustainable Communities. And is that on now?
Yes.
Are we reckon? Okay. What I want to do is break it down in the same way, and I noticed you guys are doing this for the Pioneers Conference. It's a great formula that just shout out Stan Hallett when you do it. One of my gurus was a guy named Stan Hallett, who probably was thinking about this stuff before y'all were born. He taught here. He was the director of the original community development program, and he was thinking about sustainability issues back when nobody knew the word. And he would go and talk to people, and the way he would talk to people about it was to talk about systems, to say we all are part of 6 different systems that we need to stay alive, whether we're an amoeba or a city, whether we're a mammal, whether we just crawled out of the primordial ooze, or whether we're the highly developed human brain. And those systems we have to have all of them, and they all have to be in harmony with each other. If they get out of balance, we get lost. And he has a mnemonic for talking about the systems, and the mnemonic is Feswaw, which once you hear it, then you never forget it. And those are the 6 systems, and they are, guess, food, energy,
I'm not gonna say.
Reproduction.
no, you can't, we have to be, if there's a giant lightning striking going on.
Safety.
Where would
Security.
you get safe? In shelter.
Shelter.
Who's any shelter?
Water.
Water,
Air.
air. And then this one is sort of, you were talking about it just a few minutes ago. It's actually, you don't need it because you already have it. You just have to figure out how to get rid of it.
Waste.
Waste. Food, energy, shelter, water, air, and waste. And Stan with Feswaw. And Stan would remind us all that if these don't work together, if they aren't in the right balance with each other, which is one way of thinking about sustainability, everything gets off kilter. It's that famous, if the butterfly dies and it pollinates this plant, and that plant is the food for this bunch of critters, and then the critters fertilize the forest. So everything has to sort of be in order together. It's the ecological kind of vision. Well, the same thing's true for communities and systems and economies, etc. So, Feswaw. So I'm going to take us through a little bit of Feswaw here, and talk about, as you probably know, how in our society right now all of these systems are screwed up. Okay, and just touch on how really messed up they are. Okay, let's start with food. Because food is actually probably the one we'll talk about the most, because it's the one people know the most about, it's the one people get the most exercised about, and it's actually the one where some of the best stuff is happening right now, as you will see as you go out into places like the Iron Street Farm. We're aware of the term food desert, okay? That term was coined here. And the original study that was done by Mari Gallagher was done here in Chicago, and now everyone talks about food deserts. So, okay, bad thing, food desert, right? Part of the city where it's easier to get junk food and than it is to get healthy food, and transportation systems are set up so that it's very hard to get anything but junk food. A significant number of contiguous communities, and you can look it up the map, I didn't bring it, in the city of Chicago are food deserts. Now, okay, that's bad. But people don't often think about the other side of what's bad about food deserts. So you have people who can't get healthy food just outside of the city here, in an area that runs in a triangular shape between Milwaukee, Chicago, and Madison, Wisconsin, is something called the Black Earth Triangle. And it is not the best farmland in the Midwest. It's not the best farmland in the United States. It's not the best farmland in North America. It's not the best farmland in the Western Hemisphere. It's the best farmland in the world. In the world. It goes down in some places 10 feet. Very, very rich farmland. Capable of producing everything you would ever want to be able to produce with it. We're doing two things with it. What are we doing with it?
Paving over it.
Paving over it is the first one, and so that's where we get into the relationship between food and shelter, and energy in some ways, because we'll talk about transportation in a bit. Paving it over, building subdivisions on it, plowing it up,
Fracking it.
fracking, fracking it, yeah, actually, fracking it's not, that's one thing it's not.
Oh.
Is the fracking is more downstate Illinois, underneath
okay.
the coal, near the coal deposits. It's one part of our little corner of the world that doesn't have fracking yet. It might be way down there, we just don't know. Well, and then the other thing is, let's say it's farmland. Let's say it's still farmland. What do we grow on it? What?
The two necessities of life.
The two that's exactly. Corn and soybeans, yeah. Corn and soybeans being commodity crops, most of which are used not for food at all. In fact, what you and I call food is not what the federal government's agricultural policies call food. Food, what you and I would recognize as food, vegetables, crops that grow, that you would then eat, mostly vegetables, some grains, etc., are referred to in the federal government system as specialty crops. And therefore are not subsidized. The government subsidizes the production of corn and soybeans and rice and cotton and wheat, and I think that's all.
Here's I don't
Well, yeah, it's anyway.
know.
Dairy?
What?
Is it dairy?
Well, dairy is actually food. Well, that's a whole different separate system, and that involves livestock, which we'll talk about in a minute. But food, so that those products are all subsidized as commodity crops, and if you think about it, really, corn, soybeans, cotton, and some rice aren't used for food at all. They're used to make ethanol. Corn is used to make ethanol to produce energy. Soybeans are used to make inks, and I mean, there's more soybeans made than is tofu eaten. Really, believe me. It's used to make chemicals. Corn is also used to make chemicals. The famous high fructose corn syrup story, which all I can do is say, if you have not seen cane corn, see it, because it's worth at least you sit and laugh for an hour at this particular awfulness. But anyway, high fructose corn syrup, and there's a moment in cane corn where they decide, the two guys, Ian and I can't remember the other one's name, decide they're going to make high fructose corn syrup out of their 1 acre of corn. And so they go to the chemical plant, and they aren't let in, but they're put in touch with someone who gives them the recipe of how to make high fructose corn syrup out of corn, and mix it with solvents, and then crush it, and then do this and do that and do this, and they get all the way to the done. They make themselves a little bit of high fructose corn syrup out of their corn, and they both taste it, and they spit it out. It's like, it tastes terrible. It's not. It's a chemical. It's not a food substance at all, and yet it is in practically everything we eat. And as a result, and I won't push this too far, but we now know that there's the relationship between high fructose corn syrup and the obesity epidemic is because our bodies can't regulate that particular form of carbohydrate, of simple carbohydrate. Sugar, we know when we've had too much sugar. We know when we've had too much of other forms, but we can't regulate, and especially if it's transmitted in liquids. Our bodies just don't know we're full. And so people can drink 16 gallons of Coke without stopping and not feel like they're gonna barf. If you drank 16 gallons of Kool-Aid made with sugar, you would barf. So that's part of the relationship that we know right now about that. Cotton is used for clothing, and cottonseed oil, which is used for paints and solvents. So all of the money that the food system, that the federal government puts into the food system goes to support the growing of crops that are not food. And all of the food crops, the specialty crops, are relegated to small farms that are not subsidized at all, and those folks are sort of on their own as the food system is set up right now, and the relationship between the Black Earth Triangle and Chicago and the way the food system used to work is that what was grown in the old days in that area, and also in southwestern Michigan and a little bit of northwestern Indiana, were what we call specialty crops, and farmers brought them to market in the city, and you can see the evidence of this when you move out away from the city and you come across places where the road is called half-day road, or 2-day road, plank road. That's how long it took the farmer and his wagon to get to the city, and you had to figure that out because the crops would spoil. So you needed to know how far you were from the city when you brought your crops into market. Very little of specialty crop growth is still happening in the Black Earth Triangle, and that which is happening is probably due to a lot of young folks who are now taking up farming in very small plots. And so you've got places in the city where you can't get any good food. You've got the agricultural land that could produce tons and tons and tons and tons of wonderful food, and you've got a policy, a federal policy that that lifts up commodity crops that aren't food and sort of punishes food crops. That's an easy way to start thinking about it. One of the things we need to remember here also is this is a huge system. This is not a little chump change system, the food system. In the United States, consumers spend approximately $1 trillion annually on food, or nearly 10% of the GDP. Okay? Over 16.5 million people are employed in the food industry. Okay? So it's a system that's very large and very powerful and very out of whack. Here's another interesting little factoid. Currently 400 gallons of oil equivalents are expended to feed each American every year. Relationship between food and energy again. That's the amount of energy that's used to feed you, which is 17% of all the energy used in this country, is used to produce the food system. Not necessarily all of it goes to feeding you, but nonetheless it goes to produce the food system. And we're talking about transportation, not just the energy that's used in making farm equipment and all of that kind of stuff, but also in the transportation system to move food from one place to the other, because of course food isn't local anymore. The average hunk of food travels 1,500 miles before it gets to you, and so the food system is terribly dependent on energy. Unbelievably dependent on energy. It is a very energy-intensive system. One of my favorite writers, old curmudgeonly dude named Jeremy Rifkin, once wrote a book called Entropy, which has affected my life forever. And in it he uses the analogy of the can of corn, that it takes more energy to produce the can of corn and get it to you, can it, get it to you, get it to the store, than you get from eating the can of corn. That's the definition of entropy, right? I mean, in the whole physical world system, remember your high school science class, energy can either be created or destroyed, but tends to move from available to unavailable. That's a definition of entropy. If we keep spending more energy getting our food than the food gives us, sooner or later everything slows down and stops. So, messed up system that way. Let me just say a couple more things about farmland and talk a little bit about livestock, and then we'll move on to energy. Factoid. 1.8 acres of farmland per capita is available today. Okay, right now in this country, 1.8 acres of farmland. At least 1.2 acres per person is required to maintain the current American diet. 1.2. So we got 1.8. Okay, there's a little bit left over. According to, this is from the American Farmland Trust, only 0.6 acres of farmland will be available to grow food for each American in 2050 if we keep sprawling out over the farmland that we have. So, 2050. And therefore, food prices are projected to increase 3 to 5-fold within this period. The other part is to remember that the farm economy is not what we tend to think of it. Mr. Farmer, happy, Farmer Joe, getting out and feeding his chickens, etc. There is really no farm economy like that anymore. except for this budding movement of young farmers. There have been more farms started in the last few years than in decades. And they're all eensy beensy teensy tiny, and they're all people like you that went, I'm gonna go stick my hands in the dirt. But most farms are contract farmers. They are owned by either giant land trusts, or they're owned by a handful of companies. Cargill, Archer Daniels Midland, Monsanto, Smithfield, and Tyson. And then the people who work them are employees. They're employees like the people who work at Target or at Walmart. So the idea of the family farm is sort of a nice idea that we have. Probably the only family farms left in the general region are the ones you mentioned, dairy, and that's because that is also hugely subsidized. But even then, there are giant CAFO farms out in California that are producing dairy at a much cheaper rate than folks in Wisconsin who actually still go out there and milk their cows. But it's just that they're very, 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 very protected. So the farm economy is not something that that you can look at with that sort of nostalgic look. It's why even the right-wing folks now are saying the farm subsidies, these are going to like really, really rich people who don't farm. Why are we sending all this money to them, to these giant corporations? But we'll see what happens with that.
My in-laws are farmers.
Yeah.
And I think they still own own their farm and stuff.
Yeah.
But they sign they have to sign huge contracts with
Right.
seed suppliers, basically. So while they own their farm,
Don't own their seeds.
they're handcuffed by.
And do they grow commodity crops?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Well, and then they used to do hogs, and now
Yeah.
they're going from my father-in-law who did hogs to my brother-in-law who's switching over to cattle, which is a losing proposition.
Well, we'll touch on that in just a second here. The other part is, and we didn't talk about Monsanto and GMOs, right? Does everybody know what GMOs are?
We want to get out yet this weekend.
What?
If we start
Yeah, right, no,
down
I can
that
see,
road,
you can follow this one further, you can just do a whole course on food, and that's why, and you guys are all nodding, so I'm getting that you know a lot of this stuff, so I'm not gonna like pound it really hard at you, but clearly, you can see the relationship between these systems, and the system, and then when you start genetically manufacturing food. And then livestock, just to mention livestock, living creatures. You don't have to be a vegan to think that a CAFO is a terrible thing. And that, CAFOs exist to treat living creatures like commodities. And that they are, manufactured in giant, huge, exponential numbers. Extremely inhumanely. And they produce, again, this one here, and a little bit of this here, amounts of toxicity that threaten our water table, our air too a little bit. And the average, I think pig CAFO, it's a pig CAFO, produces as much waste annually as a city of 150,000 people. And they're just kept in those big old pools. And if one of those pools breaks, which happens sometimes, all of that waste goes into the water at some place and time. The worst one that I remember, and when CAFOs came on my radar screen, was in North Carolina during one of the hurricanes. Yep. And it caused a bunch of waste tanks on the CAFOs, the chicken and pig CAFOs in North Carolina, to overflow into the Noe River. Is it the Noe? N-E-U-E? River system and that it wiped out everything living in that river system for the entire length of the watershed, out to the ocean. So there's that problem with CAFOs, plus the other connection with the way we produce livestock, or the other bad system. The way we produce livestock is that animals kept in that kind of density tend to get sick. And so in order to keep them from getting sick, we dose them with giant doses of antibiotics in order to do two things. They grow bigger when you give them antibiotics, and they hopefully don't get ill. Well, that causes, when we eat that causes us to build up resistance to antibiotics. I mean, it causes bugs to be able to be resistant to the antibiotics that we have. So our food makes us sick.
And can you just
Yeah,
remind
go ahead.
us what CAFO stands for?
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Concentrated Animal Feeding Operation. Again, in cane corn, they take you to one, and it's stunning. So, okay, food system. We got it. Not a good system. Not a system. Not built for sustainability at this point in time. Let's put it that way. Okay. So let's segue to energy. And to tell you the energy story, I have to tell you the story of two peaks. Okay? And the first peak is the peak that we call, I can't write. Is something we call peak oil. So we're talking now about energy that comes from petroleum products, because there's different kinds of energy. We'll talk about both of them. Energy that comes from petroleum products is, if you liked the food system, you'll love this system. It isn't something we've used for a really long time. Maybe about 1830 or so was when, a guy named, had an interesting name, his name was Rockefeller. Rockefeller? Yeah, the Rockefellers. Wait, who's Steele?
Yeah. Well, Rockefellers, you got that right, but I didn't associate it with matter, but that's
Oh,
okay.
okay. Well,
Doesn't matter.
it's somewhere around in
Doesn't
there. Really, literally in Pennsylvania, kind of wandered off
Yeah.
into the woods and saw this kind of viscous stuff laying off on the surface of the ground, and said, maybe we can do something with this. And started later a company known as Standard Oil. And in that period of time, the oil that was being harvested from the earth was near the surface, and it was easy to get, and it was really, really, really clean. They call it sweet crude. And so you could get a whole lot of it, so we did. We just sucked it up. We were like, wow, this is better than coal. This is great. Look at the stuff we can, and if you distill it and you refine it, you can make all sorts of good things out of it. Yahoo! And so the early years of the oil industry were just simple. Everything was simple and easy and wonderful and cheap. And lots of people made lots of money. And Rockefellers. Standard Oil, he started a little company. And then, as time went by, more oil was discovered in the United States, down in Texas and Oklahoma. And if you saw, There Will Be Blood, it was that kind of, wildcatting kind of experience where people, to place kind of in the middle of the Depression, sort of toward the end of the Depression, I think, in the general area. So people were suddenly becoming fabulously wealthy, finding gushers of oil that came swooping out of the ground. So we started using even more of it. And then further up the timeline, well, gosh darn, bunch of sandy, hot places in the Middle East discovered, filled with nomadic Bedouin tribes, discovered, wow, we are sitting on top of the biggest deposit of oil, yahoo! And suddenly 40% of our oil came from the Middle East. And we used more, and it was cheaper. And more, and cheaper. And then, Henry Ford came in here somewhere, and all of the ways that we imagined to use oil. Now, geologists have been talking about this for a long time, and it's now getting debunked a little bit because they keep finding more oil, but it's a myth, which I'll explain in a minute. Sooner or later, because oil is a limited commodity, we're not making any more of it. No, well, if we are, we're making it very slowly. The amount of it that exists on the planet is going to disappear. So there's a point at which the peak availability and inexpensive capacities of what's available is going to reach its best moment. And many people think it actually has done that already, somewhere in the 70s. And others say, oh, no, see, there's not going to be anything like peak oil because we just keep finding more. But the truth of the matter is, if you pay some attention to that peak, where they're finding it now is like all the way down at the bottom of the ocean and then go another 6 miles. Wow! Off the coast of Angola we found all this oil. It's 6 miles under the bottom of the ocean. Well, great. The cost that it takes to get that oil out is phenomenal. And so what do? Again, public policy is we subsidize the oil companies for their exploration costs and then for their abilities to then sink more wells. We're finding it, there's tons of it now under the Arctic Ocean they've discovered. Where, there's no ability to clean up a spill if it happened. There's not even Coast Guard stations up there, but everybody wants to open up the Arctic. So yes, there might still be a lot of oil left on the planet, but we're coming down the other side of the hill here because it's harder to get to and more expensive to get to it. And also, this is true of the famous tar sands in Alberta. It's not that sweet crude stuff that you can just kind of scoop up off the surface anymore. It's all gooed up in all sorts of stuff. It's very thick and very, and so you have to do things like take tons of water. The amount of water that they put into the ground under pressure to make the tar sands rise so that they can scoop them up, and then there's still like that spill that happened in Arkansas, the texture of like asphalt, and then that has to be refined, and all that stuff has to be refined out. All that extra goo has to be refined out, which then makes more waste. That has to be they dump it. It's treated as hazardous waste. The boosters are saying, ha, you all said we were going to run out of oil by 2030, and now we're not. No, we're not. But good luck when the cost of gasoline is, $25 a gallon. And imagine what will happen to things like air travel. when the cost of fuel for airplanes becomes so high. So that only maybe, say the military will have access to fuel after a certain point in time. So the oil system, the dependency on oil and its cute little cousin, natural gas, which they live together. Fracking is the perfect. We're going to save our fossil fuel economy by using natural gas instead, because we are the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. And natural gas is everywhere in the United States, and all you have to do is go way down in the bedrock and force chemicals and water under high pressure into the bedrock until the bedrock cracks and lets the gas go, and the gas rises and comes out. And then, you've got this chemical water stuff left over that you can't use much of. But it's great. Fracking, we love it. It's going to change the economy. It's going to make America, it's going to turn our economy around. Natural gas. Yes, it's a little cleaner. But again, in the Jeremy Rifkin world, the amount of energy that it takes to get the energy that you get from this is more than you get from it. So the average fracking well uses more energy than it
And also,
consumes.
is it 5 to 7 million gallons of water per well? Is
That's
that what I heard?
phenomenal.
I think I just read 400 million. I just did a short little article on that, and I can look it up. It's huge. It's huge.
Amount.
Fracking job.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge.
Yep.
And water we haven't got to yet, is not exactly,
No, something that we can keep making either. Okay. And remember that, again, when we think about this, the system, oil is not just used for us to get energy. Oil is also used, petroleum is used in practically everything. We are bathed in petroleum. It's, plastics and fabrics and everything. And so we are deeply embedded in that system. And it is a very messed up system. Now the other kind of peak that I wanted to talk a little bit about is the other way, the other form of energy. Remember that oil is just a fuel, okay? And you use it to drive your car, or to heat your house, or to boil water and turn a turbine and make electricity. Electricity is a totally different peak reality, and that is that electricity has this unusual capacity that also goes back to the laws of physics, because energy can either be created or destroyed, but it tends to move from available to non-available. Electricity has to be used almost exactly when it's made. You can't really store it. There's not a tank you can put it in. And as it moves, it loses a tremendous amount of its energy capacity. So to make electricity, you need to pretty much have all of the electrical generating possibilities that you would ever need all the time. Right? Because on a day when it's 105 in the middle of July at 4 o'clock and everybody has their air conditioners on, if we don't have the generating capacity to make all of that electricity, which is called peak electricity, then we brown out and we black out. We just can't. So you have to have plants that can make electricity to the most that we can imagine we'd ever need it. This is why we have well, I mean, just recent stuff with nuclear power plants. We're suddenly paying attention to nuclear power plants again. For a while, people were saying, "Oh, new generation nuclear power plants. That's going to save us. We won't be burning coal, which is still the largest source of electric burning fuel to make electricity." But in a way that is true of electricity, that's not true of everything else. If you don't use electricity, it's a concept called negawatts, not mega, but negawatts. Then the most expensive electricity to make is the last 10%. Okay, it's like the last 10% of the peak is the most expensive to make because you have to bring on these little plants that quickly can become online and make electricity. The base is cheap to make. That's just what you're always making in the background at night. You're still making it. But on that hot day, the last 10% is really expensive. If you didn't have to make that 10%, you would save tons of money. And so the strategies to reduce the peak, to cut off the peak, as they say, are ways that people are thinking about the electrical system right now. I was part of a project years ago with the Center for Neighborhood Technology, where we said, people using energy efficient light bulbs and energy efficient appliances, that's nice. But, you get your electric bill and you look at it and you go, oh, look, I got an energy efficient refrigerator and my electric bill went down from $41 to $39. That's great. But it isn't enough to make people go out and do it, unless you're good-hearted like all of us. And so we said, what if everybody together reduced their energy requirements by using energy efficiency? And it was everybody that lived in a community. What would happen if we could show that we saved enough we did enough megawatts that it was of value to the Commonwealth Edison, the provider. And so Commonwealth Edison agreed to this little experiment that we did for 3 years, and we basically took the community of Pilsen and worked with people, replaced air conditioners, took out old ballasts on these kind of lights and replaced them with energy efficient ballasts, and worked with small factories and small businesses to different ways that they would do energy efficiency. Started what we called the Community Energy Co-op in Pilsen, and in the space of 1 year, we were able to prove to Commonwealth Edison that we had saved 27.7 megawatts of energy. City of Chicago on that hot day uses about, at this point, I think it's somewhere between 360 and 380, I think, megawatts per day. So we were able to show that we, or is it per year? No, and the peak is 360, that's what it is. We were able to shave 27.7 megawatts off the peak during that summer. That was pretty cool. Commonwealth Edison gave us, because they determined this was what it was worth to them, $7 million for doing that. And that money was reinvested in Pilsen and put some solar panels and energy efficiency in the schools. And the community of Pilsen got to decide how to spend it. It was such a great idea that Commonwealth Edison got rid of it really fast. They went, not so sure. We don't want people to aggregate their savings. Instead, what we'll do, and that's what they're doing now, and probably some of you have it if you have a single-family home. What's called the real-time pricing, which means you have a meter that knows what the actual cost of electricity is at that time, and then you can decide. And then the ComEd and the co-op send you what the price is, what they think the prices are going to be, because futures trading, all of energy pricing comes from commodities. I mean, futures trading in the NYMEX, the energy market. And so if you know that tomorrow at 4 o'clock it's going to cost a real lot to use energy, you might do your laundry. You might run your wash machine or your dryer at night. You might make that decision. Now they are coming up with, and then you will save more money. They're coming up with meters that will actually do this for you. You can program them to shut your stuff off for the price when the prices go up and down. So they're kind of hooking us in with ooh man, that's technology's so great, you can save some money. But they didn't really want everybody to get together to start saving and reducing the amount of natural gas. It's mostly these peak plants are run by natural gas because they can fire up really fast, and coal and nuclear power that are creating the energy system. So there's all sorts of different ways now to do this kind of work, to lower the peak. And some of them are really sort of interesting. They're sort of almost Paleolithic. Like there's a building not far from here. Well, there's actually a building in two directions. There's two of them. One is right on Adams and State, and the other one is over here on Wacker and Van Buren. And they just look like, the one on Adams and State has a Walgreens on the first floor. So if you're walking past it, you think, oh, Walgreens. But if you're up at the Chicago Semester offices and you look out at the roof of that building, at certain times of the day, and especially in the summer, steam comes out of the roof of that building. Well, with that building, that's called I've just forgot it. But anyway, it's a big ice box. And it makes ice in the day. I mean, it makes ice at night when the electricity is cheap. Giant bunches of ice when electricity is cheap, and then it lets the ice melt during the day in the heat as it fans go over the ice and spread it to the neighboring buildings as air conditioning.
Is it Palmer House that uses that mostly, or who uses
Palmer
it?
House, actually, it's called a district cooling. Thank you. District cooling system. It's pretty a lot of the buildings that are new enough to be able to do it in that area. There's 2 district cooling areas in downtown, and you can hook into them for about, I don't know how many blocks, but yeah, so the district cooling station. So that's like, oh, they make ice and then they blow fans on it, and they get air conditioning. There's also, I won't go into the smart grid because that's a whole nother story, but the smart grid is a way to think about reducing the use of this system by making the grid, which is a one-way operation now, and it's probably, from the 50s technology, to making it a two-way operation so that it can talk to you and you can talk to it, and it knows what you're using, and it can move the right amount of electricity around. And if you like the idea of the smart grid, look it up. There's great videos on YouTube about the smart grid. So, 2 peaks. One is the mythological peak oil story, but one that you're gonna have to deal with in your lives. Probably not me, but you will. And then the other is ways in which the electricity system could be made more, not only community friendly, but less gigantic system. To imagine the size of the energy, well, just all you have to do is listen at the beginning of every quarter for the profits of ExxonMobil to get a sense. This is the most, every quarter it beats itself as the most profitable corporation in the history of the world. Every quarter. You know, how much of the global economy is tied up in energy? We fight wars for energy. We fought wars for energy. Wars were won because of energy. There's a great book by the energy historian named Daniel Yergin called The Prize, if you ever want to learn about how tied up we are in the energy system. Okay, water, and then we'll take a quick break. I mean, not break, but I'll take some quick questions and we'll chunk. We'll turn it off and then we'll turn it back on again. Really, the biggest thing you need to know about water, while you're here anyway, is that every morning you should get up, face that way, and say, thank you. Thank you. Because we are the luckiest people on the planet. We live next to 20% of the world's fresh water. And we don't thank it enough. 20% of the world's fresh water, the Great Lakes. Fresh water is not, well, you can make more fresh water in a sort of a cheating way through desalination plants that are extremely expensive and use more energy than they should, I guess would be the best way to say it. But it is not, it's not a technology that, you know, you can just sort of slap up in place. They put it in places like Saudi Arabia and Australia and stuff. But otherwise, all the fresh water that's ever on the planet is here. And a significant amount of it is locked up in the glaciers and ice caps.
In Greenland.
What?
In Greenland too, the little.
In Greenland, yeah. And they're melting. And when they melt into the sea, which is back into the saline environment, and so who knows?